Hello and welcome to Analog Insights. In today's episode, I'm taking a closer look at the Omnar Bertele 50mm f2. A wonderful and fantastic recreation of the vintage 50mm or 5cm f2 Sonnar Jena lens that was designed by the legendary Dr. Ludwig Bertele, hence the name. This lens here was created in 1934, and the vintage one is really famous, but it suffers from all sorts of problems like a mid-aperture focus shifts, then focus shifts at closer distances below 1 meters. Then that glass back then was relatively soft, so it comes with all sorts of scratches. And here we have a modern recreation that retains the classic formula with the 6 elements and 3 groups design, but has multi-coating. It has a correction, an innovative floating lens block. This is what the FLB in the name stands for. That is a completely newly developed approach to solving the focus shift problems that many of these lenses have. And it basically connects, without getting too much into detail, it basically connects your aperture ring to the focusing ring, and depending on what you choose, it makes slight corrections. And they not only developed this here in 5 years of research, of really developing, engineering, researching and designing this lens, but they also made it available to the lens design community in an open source fashion in the form of a white paper. And who's they? Behind this creation, behind Omnar lenses, is a small company in Scotland and a group of really experts and sonar fans, and that is Christopher Andreo from Skelani Optomechanics in Scotland and Alexandria. They are basically creating these lenses by hand. And that means right now they are producing the first batch of 30 lenses, which will be available in September 2025. Then in the winter they are producing the next batch of 50 lenses, and then next summer they are producing a final, another batch of 50 lenses. And they are all numbered, as you can see here, and engraved. And of course, this also costs some money. So these lenses here are available for £2,750, excluding tax. So this is definitely like a territory, but at the same time, these lenses are of course completely different, and they also come with some advantages. Just one example is that they are covering an image circle of 62 millimeters, and that as a result of that, they can also be used with a 44 by 33 millimeters digital medium format sensor like the Fujifilm GFX or the Hasselblad XCD series would have them. And in addition to that, they also cover even some large format cinema cameras. This is a handmade masterpiece that uses all sorts of innovations to revive a classic lens and at the same time make it accessible to a modern Leica M rangefinder shooter. And it solves all these problems that you don't have to worry about cleaning marks or air bubbles that the old original ones suffer from. All the focus shifts are gone, and it's just really working nicely. And full disclosure here, I have this lens here on loan, so I don't get any money for this review. I also don't have an affiliate link or anything. I'm just getting this great opportunity to test this lens, and then I will pass it on to the next reviewer, because of course these are naturally rare. You can see it in my version here, it's engraved with a 4. So this is one of the early lenses that they created, and I get the opportunity to try it, and of course I jumped at that opportunity. I took the lens out for various photo walks in Munich and then Zurich, shooting mostly Ilford FP4, but also Kodak Ultramax 400, Kodak Portra 160, and Kodak Tri-X and Ferrania Ultra 50. And I also took it out for a portrait session with Sam, a model from London, here for Most Wanted Models in Munich. And we shot some Ilford FP4 black and white portraits with a strong contrast. The ambition was to create something that looks a little bit like a traditional Giorgio Armani ad for some nice scent or something like that. And this is what we were aiming for at that particular morning. As always, these films were developed and scanned by my trusted on-film lab in Frankfurt, and I can't wait to dive in there and share the results with you. Before diving into this modern recreation, let's take a few steps back and look at Dr. Ludwig Bertele. He was born in my hometown in 1900 and became one of the most famous and influential lens designers. For instance, he created the legendary Anostar in 1923 already, then the Sonnar around 1930, and then the Biogon in 1935. And he initially learned with Rodenstock, where he revolutionized the way optical designs were calculated already during his apprenticeship when he was a very, very young man. And then he developed this legendary Anostar lens to improve film projections. And then his employer Ernemann suggested using the same lens design for photographic purposes as well. And later, when Ernemann joined forces with other companies and basically merged to become the Zeiss Ikon AG in the 1930s, Bertele had developed and patented the famous Sonnar formula, which was an improvement of the Anostar, but instead of 4 groups, it came with only 3 groups. The Sonnar, with its maximum aperture of f2 or even f1.5, which was of course amazing at the time, was the standard lens of the Contax, which was the professional camera at the time and competed with the early Leica cameras. And we have to remember those days, because back then Carl Zeiss was clearly ahead of lights, and many people don't remember that because Leica has now that huge reputation and history, and also the way it's selling itself has certainly changed the perception, but Carl Zeiss back then was clearly ahead, and this Sonnar lens here was simply considered fantastic and outstanding. And Ludwig Bertele and his inventions heavily influenced the development of amateur photography as well, filmmaking and aerial photography, and of course naturally in the context of military applications. And one of his creations, the Biogon, even made it to a NASA mission on the Hasselblad cameras. But back to the Contax and the 1930s. So it is a highly refined 1934 Sonnar lens design which Omnar Lenses is recreating here. And the big question is why? Why not just get the original? The original lenses come with all sorts of problems. They are very, very hard to find is the first problem. Then back then, almost all of the lenses come with scratches because the lens material was not coated and protected, and it was just very soft glass. So even cleaning it a little bit would produce scratches. So most of them are just full of scratches. And then the optical glass type used back then also predates the invention of ultrasonic curing, which means that a lot of them come with internal air bubbles and similar problems. And there were also very few made only for the Leica thread mount, which still need to be adapted to be used on the Leica M mount. So you already get a feeling you need to look for one that was made for the Leica thread mount, and then it needs to come without the internal air bubbles. It should come with only very little scratches. And then they still suffer from the focus shift problems that I've touched on in the beginning. And here you suddenly have a modern recreation made specifically for the Leica M mount that is multi-coated and does away with all of these focus shift problems. It is optimized to work at closer distances of 0.7 meters. And it is optimized because of the floating lens block that I've mentioned before, and the connection between the aperture and the focusing ring to have no focus shift problems at all. And here, this is basically the result of Omnar Lenses and their fascination. This is a collaboration of Hamish Gill and Skeilani Optomechanical in Scotland. Hamish is famous for his 35mm compact.com website, and personally I learned a lot from the reviews on that website, and he's also on the record as a true connoisseur, I would say, of vintage lenses and especially the Sonnar formula, and knowing a lot about it and being able to communicate and see the differences in the different lens designs and what makes them special. And that person, in combination with Christopher Andreo and a group of other people, coming together and using the capabilities of Skeilani Optomechanical to create these fantastic lenses. So, as mentioned before, these are created by hand. Skeilani operates similarly to an independent watchmaker, I would say. So they designed the lenses using a variety of 3D modeling and CAD software. They machine quite a few parts themselves and then paint and assemble them in a clean room, and then they calibrate them as well. So about 95% of the parts are made in Alexandria in Scotland. And these are all handmade, as I said, and they create about 150 lenses per year. And they not only create lenses themselves, but originally they also convert vintage lenses and make them available to specific mounts. And they try to create and keep them available and accessible to modern photographers. So quite a service. So very few lenses, and this Bertele here is one of them. And let's take a closer look at it. So let's take a closer look at the Omnar Bertele 50mm f2 MC FLB, to state the full title. This is a fantastic lens. It comes with the original formula of 6 elements in 3 groups, and they really tried hard to retain the original formula while doing away with all the small problems. And as mentioned, I could discuss that innovation of the floating lens block for an entire episode. Needless to say, they basically created a white paper about it, shared it with the entire community, this innovation, and they basically now manage that you can simply focus your rangefinder patch, and then the focus stays at exactly the same spot throughout the entire aperture range if you would change it afterwards. And this is what is so amazing about it. And without getting into too much detail, it's really a complex orchestration of brass mechanical parts inside the Bertele that move the rear optical carriage of the optical block depending on the aperture value that is set. And the rangefinder cam accurately positioning itself basically in a non-linear fashion to match the varying effective focal length value that the formula would exhibit from basically 0.7 meters all the way through to infinity. And basically all this gives now this homage a modern purpose and a modern application that is completely reliable and that could also be used for filming, for instance, and movie making, if that is interesting to you. Another important innovation about this one here is that the mount for the Omnar lenses is the same for all of them, and the mount is part of why this is possible in the first place. So the in the name Omnar basically stands for all, and is referring to the fact that all of the lenses feature the same mount design and the same mount element. And this is interesting because, of course, it creates a little bit of economies of scale in the context where you do so many things by hand, but it also enables this kind of innovation. And from a visual perspective, you can actually see that through. So the lens is an all brass helicoid construction, and you can see the brass through between the mount element and the remaining lens when focusing. And you can see that here because the entire lens element is then being turned when focusing. And this is a little bit like on a vintage Contax it would be as well, or if you're using a Nikon S camera and focus there with your rangefinder lens, it's basically the same effect. The entire lens is turning here. The lens comes with a stepless aperture ring to stop the lens down from f2 wide open to f22. I personally really like the stepless feel here, and of course that also adds to its movie making capabilities. The focusing ring features an incredibly beautiful focusing grip that has a special knurling here and a focusing tab, which personally I really like. And the lens also supports the typical minimum focusing distance of 0.7 meters as mentioned before, and the lens is multiple multi-coated in sapphire blue and amethyst violet. And it comes with a standard E39 filter thread, which is really nice and convenient. And in this particular case, Scalani was kind enough to offer me with a Leica UVA filter along with it, of course, to protect the lens a little bit during my review. But of course, it's also nice to have that in that particular case. And I also used the lens briefly with my yellow filter of the same size, and it was really nice to switch back and forth between my Summicron filters and this one here. The lens only protrudes 35mm off the camera and only weighs 260 grams, which for me is a really nice sweet spot between still being compact and light and still feel very nice and valuable, so to speak. You have something tangible and heavy in your hand. So all the engravings on the lens look very special and unlike anything that I have ever seen, and also the knurling here, the different knurlings for the aperture ring and the focusing ring are really, really nice. And yeah, a particularly nice touch on this lens is that they are all numbered and engraved accordingly. So this is a really, really special and unique lens. And personally, I've never seen anything beautiful as this one. By the way, it will it develops a little bit of brassing and patina over time. It is an all brass construction, and during the short period that I had this lens, it already developed some brassing, which in my opinion is really, really beautiful. So what about the optical performance and results? I was truly surprised to see the performance of this lens. It comes with a really high resolution, an incredible sharpness, a high contrast, and that across the entire frame. And this is what distinguishes this lens the most in comparison to other vintage lenses and what you kind of would expect from such a lens. There's hardly any fall off or vignetting or anything like that, because you have such a generous image illumination circle that easily illuminates a 44 by 33 digital medium format sensor on Fujifilm GFX or the Hasselblad XCD series as well. And this is what they're advertising here as well. And you can clearly see that even when shooting just the full frame camera. It's amazing the kind of quality that you get, even and the sharpness in the corners of your frame. Across the board, a fantastic resolution, high quality look and feel, and most importantly, you get the Sonnar bokeh that I was expecting and that I was actually hoping for in that lens. It's, I would say, one of the most beautiful, buttery smooth bokehs that I've ever seen. A wonderful transition from the in focus to the out of focus areas of your frame that works when shooting portraits, that works when shooting street shots like this one here in Zurich, where you're really drawn towards your subject. You have the subject stand out in that classic vintage 3D pop, for lack of a better word. So this lens combines a clear, decidedly vintage character with the benefits of a multi-coating, a modern coating, and a really, really nice resolution. And this, to me, there's hardly anything out there like that, in my opinion. Some of the lenses in the Leica Classic line are aspiring to a similar effect, but most of them come with fall off and vignetting and have certain downsides that this lens does not have. So if you look at the value for the money, you get a lot more than you would get in most Leica cases, and it's really, really outstanding. So I'm deeply impressed by this lens, and it also comes with fantastic color representation. I would even argue that it really starts to shine when shooting color. So here I had some Kodak Ultra Max 400 and a Kodak Portra 160 in Zurich tested, and to my eyes this is a wonderful color reproduction. It really shows you a special vintage look at the same time. It reminded me a little bit of some of the other vintage lenses that I have and where I typically like the color reproduction, but here you can still see the benefits of the multi-coating and how it is being coated. These are very deliberate decisions by true fans of the Sonnar formula and people who really understand what they are doing and try to get the most out of this classic 6 elements by 3 groups in 3 groups design. So yeah, you can clearly hear how fascinated I am by the optical results that it produces. This is one of the best lenses that I've ever shot, and it's probably one of my favorite portrait lenses that I've ever shot. It's simply amazing, and if this is important to you, this combination of a vintage character combined with the benefits of modern coating and even potentially shooting that same lens on potentially large format or even a digital medium format, you can do that. It's simply outstanding, and on a full frame camera it performs like nothing that like anything I've ever seen, to be honest. So the Bertele is truly special and justifies its price on many levels. So what about the handling and my personal impressions? As mentioned, I've never had anything like that. For starters, it looks and feels fantastic, and it is an incredibly compact lens. I looked it up because I was so interested, and it basically compares to my Leica Summicron V4 that I like so much, and even the military specs Elcan, the famous vintage one that is very hard to get, protrudes I think only 4 millimeters less from the camera. So this is an incredibly compact lens, and at the same time you get an f2 open aperture, and you get an amazing image quality and result in a very large image circle, as touched on before. The focusing ring feels incredible, and of course as a layman I didn't know quite where to point this and then Jules explained to me that the whole lens uses different types of knurling here, and that the special structure that you see on the focusing ring is one type of knurling, and then the one on the aperture ring is a different one. And these are the small touches that make you feel different about the lens when using it and holding it and looking at it. And it's also the kind of lens that is a true conversation starter, where people stop you and ask you about it, and once they understand this is really like a unique watch from an independent watchmaker, and when you mention, okay, yeah, they are producing 130 in the next year or so, people look at you and it's just mind-boggling, because this is so special and so unique, and you rarely have anything like that. And it also feels like that in your hand. It's not a lens where you feel like, oh, this is handmade in the bad way, but it really feels created to the highest quality standards, incredible in terms of the feeling, the softness and the material and how it develops over time. And as briefly touched on, the brassing already developed in the short period of time that I used this lens, and this gave it so much more character and made me love the lens even more. And it is very hard for me to pass it on to the next reviewer, because I simply fell in love with this lens. As mentioned, the E39 filter size is also fantastic and makes it easy to switch between different lenses with the same filter set. In general, the 39 is a very nice sweet spot from my perspective, and many Summicrons in the Leica realm have the same. If I had the money for such a lens and could justify purchasing another 50mm lens, then I would definitely go for it. This is the product that just reminds me of how it must feel to get a handmade watch from an independent watchmaker, or something that is similarly exclusive. And if you have deeper pockets than I have, I can just highly recommend to take a look at this particular lens. And as I've touched on before, for me it's definitely a viable alternative to all the Leica classic line lenses and other Leica lenses that are similarly expensive and that are out there, or even much more expensive. Here you get a lot more lens for the money, and if you look at the photographic value, it is really remarkable. The other thing, of course, when talking about value is the value retention, and here I cannot say for sure. My gut feeling is that this kind of rare lens would hold its value, and you rarely see Omnar lenses on the secondary market. These are not the kinds of lenses that are being sold. So if you have one and would ever want to sell it, I'm pretty confident that you will be able to sell it, because they are typically limited. They're not producing so many of them. So the value retention is probably there as well. And looking at like a Summilux 50mm these days, I also feel like they don't retain the value as well as they did in the past. So this one here might actually be a good investment at this current moment in time. Of course, I don't know this. I cannot predict the future, but this is something that I kind of thought about in my head, like back and forth. Is this actually a good investment? How would be the value retention of such a lens? And by now I have come to believe, okay, it's probably actually pretty good, and you might lose more value when purchasing a brand new like a Summilux and then selling it in 5 years time or so, versus this particular lens here. It might become just a really interesting unicorn that people are looking after. And on a larger scale, I also want to highlight how important the creation of such Leica M lenses is for the market, and why the big players should take notice. And with the big players, I mean Leica and Folklanders and those companies that are moving a lot of product, because here we already see a similar directions and turns when looking at Thypog and their Eureka line, where they try to reinvent vintage lens formulas and make them accessible for the Leica M mount. Or we look at the Light Lens Lab company and what they're doing, recreating classic formulas, creating these tribute lenses of those lenses that are very hard to come by or hard to afford, and making them accessible for the Leica M mount. And of course, you have certain things in the lineup in the Leica classic line, but this is prohibitively expensive. And at least to my eyes and to my hands, these lenses here, the Omnar lenses, but also to some extent what Light Lens Lab is doing and what Thypog is doing, they just feel different. They feel so much more handcrafted and so much more refined. And the Omnar lens here for me is really on a different level. I haven't had any kind of lens in my hands that feels so well crafted and refined, and it really brings back a certain feeling for the craftsmanship that I haven't seen and experienced in a while, except I really pick up my 1930s and 40s lenses. They have a somewhat similar feel without the modern production capabilities in there. So, of course, there are also downsides. With all the upsides that I've mentioned in terms of optical quality, in terms of handling and how it feels, there are also some downsides. Most importantly, when focusing the lens, the entire lens turns. And you can certainly get used to it, and it honestly bothered me more in the beginning than it did towards the end of using it for the test here. So you definitely get used to it. It also helps to be familiar with the Contax or the Nikon S rangefinders, because here you have a similar effect. But what it basically means, if you're coming from a Leica Summicron and are used to knowing where your aperture sits and which kind of value would be in terms of muscle memory where, or if you're focusing your lens, you kind of have that point, and then you still have the ability to change your aperture and you still know where it is. You lose all of that because you don't have orientation here. So what I typically did is I try to set the aperture first and then focus afterwards, so to get correct exposure, decide for the image which aperture to pick, and then do it. If I did it the other way around, it sometimes happened to me that I already focused, then started to turn the aperture, and because of the force that I used, I turned the entire lens, changing the focus again. So I had to refocus after setting the aperture and getting the correct exposure indication, in this particular case in my Leica M6, which has a built-in light meter and so on. So this is something to know, that it can be a little bit of a nuisance here. Screwing on a filter also worked well, but I felt a little bit here, the handcraft and handmade thing, that it took a little bit of force to unscrew it again and to kind of get the thread going. It needed some screwing in a filter and unscrewing it again a few times for it to work perfectly fine. But then this is really a minor point. Then it was perfectly fine. And now this sounds a little bit paradoxical, but I get a bit more out of shooting a lens that is a little bit harder in terms of handling and has these nuances than having a lens that just works super easy and simple. As mentioned, I really appreciated having this focusing tab. I found it remarkable to be able to see the brass-colored helicoid shine through when focusing it. This is a really, really nice touch. And yeah. Overall, I haven't had any kind of lens like that. Personally, I believe in the value retention. I understand it's a lot of money. I personally would be hard-pressed to justify this kind of investment for another 50mm lens, but I'm certainly intrigued, and I find this is one of the most special lenses that I've ever reviewed here on the channel. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Analog Insights and my review of the Omnar Bertele 50mm f2, a tribute to the classic 1930s Sonnar by Carl Zeiss and Dr. Ludwig Bertele. This is hands down one of the most interesting lenses I have ever reviewed on the channel, and I haven't been as excited about using a lens before, to be honest. It's really fantastic. It is truly remarkable in so many ways. It comes with a little bit of downsides, but optically it's just outstanding. And I would honestly love to own one, and if I had deeper pockets, or if you have deeper pockets, I can highly recommend getting one and at least considering one. In my opinion, it is a significantly more interesting purchase than just getting another Leica Sumilux or a Leica Classic Line re-edition. This one here goes back to a time where Leica was not the dominant company when it comes to lens and optical design. Instead, photographers were adapting Carl Zeiss Sonnar lenses on their Oscar Barnack Leicas because they were considered superior. And in a similar vein, and in that tradition, you could say this lens, even today, is a very, very interesting alternative for those who are really into getting a vintage look out of their Leica M cameras, or even now modern digital medium format cameras as well. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like it and maybe even share it with your friends. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to our channel. Jules Greg and I really appreciate each and every subscriber coming our way. So thanks for watching. I hope to see you soon. Bye.